All right, well, good morning, everyone. We're glad that you're here. Thank you for joining us for our first, I believe, CEO coffee chat with Nicole Willis. We're hoping to do a few more of these as we go along, but we thought it was a good opportunity to get everybody together and provide some conversation. So just as a bit of an intro, we're glad that you're here. You could be anywhere on this sort of gloomy Thursday morning, but you're choosing to spend some time with us, and we appreciate it. Last April, our board named Nicole Willis our CEO after a pretty exhaustive national search. But of course, she'd already been leading the organization as an acting CEO since the previous July, including through some really, really tough months of the COVID pandemic. But in the past year, Nicole really has steered us toward a positive new future, which we're really happy to talk about today. And we're going to do that through the lens of strategic planning, women in leadership, diversity, equity, inclusion, and much more. We're certainly going to have time for Q&A, but by all means, as you have questions or thoughts, pop them into the chat, and we'll make sure that we get to them when time allows. So you're probably wondering who I am. So my name is Matt Katzfey. My day job is the Director of Alumni Outreach and High School Development at an organization in Chicago called Big Shoulders Fund. We provide support to schools with demonstrated need, and those schools provide a quality values-based education for Chicago's children. And my job is really, really unique. I'm a fundraiser by trade. I've been doing that for almost 2 decades. And my job really is to enable elementary schools to raise money and engage their alumni. And I also act as sort of a vice president of development at 2 Catholic high schools. It's pretty cool stuff. But in my spare time, I'm fortunate to be married to an extremely talented musician, my best friend and my partner in life named Anne. I'm a father of a teenager and a tween. And so I do the dad cab thing, driving all over the city. And I spend a lot of time trying to understand how they communicate through grunts and one-word texts, if you know what I mean, if anybody has teenagers. I ride bicycles long distances for no reason. I play music as a drummer and a percussionist, and I really try to promote anti-racism in all that I do. And really, my purpose in life is to be of maximum service to others. And part of that is serving on the governing board and development board at Heartland Health Centers. But what we're here to do is talk with Nicole. So a little bit about Nicole, right? Nicole's bio can be found online through a quick Google search, which I'm not going to go into today. But if you want to, it'll show you all kinds of professional accolades and accomplishments. And all of those accolades, accomplishments are very important if you're going to be CEO of a federally qualified health center like Heartland Health Centers. But I thought about today and how to introduce Nicole for the conversation. I thought of 3 things, and there's many more. But these 3 things have been my observations working with her over the past several years. 1, Nicole makes it look easy. Her approach to managing complex situations, strategies comes through with peace of mind and a thoughtfulness that enables others to engage in the mission. Number 2, she has an incredible long-term vision that surprises me at every turn. We'll get into this a little bit today, but her approach to strategy and where the organization is going, it's not only inspirational, but it's really rooted in facts and data and real world information. And number 3, and most importantly to me, she inspires others. Maybe not in the way that other CEOs do from like a look at me position or an ego stance, but her approach is really relationship driven. And I'm always inspired by her ability to juggle so many things while making time for things like a new high school graduate and a conversation with a young person to help them find their way as a young healthcare professional. But enough about that. Before we get started, Nicole, do you want to say anything to the group before we get into some of the questions?
Sure. I just want to say I appreciate everyone making the time this morning, and I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Sounds good. So let's get into it, shall we? All right. Tell me, Nicole, about your first year as CEO of Heartland Health Centers. Where do you see the organization going in the next 3 years?
Well, all things considered, Matt, I think my first year went very well as Heartland CEO. We learned how to adjust to a new normal amongst a sea of change. What I am most proud about during my first year is the positivity, the hard work, and all of that was evident across all levels of the organization. And then that the team was just incredibly supportive. We've done a lot of good work through this first year that I think will set us up very nicely in the years to come. And so in the next 3 years, we'll have a new name and a brand identity. We'll still be grounded in our mission, and we'll continue to provide high quality healthcare, but with a solid infrastructure that's based on improved and expanded access to care for our patients. And then in addition to the new name, we're going to be implementing a new electronic medical record. And that will have some advanced technology so that our patients will have a new patient portal that will allow for bidirectional communication with their providers. And then we're also implementing some new technologies that will allow our patients to schedule appointments and allow us to provide better care for them. Much of my first year has been spent creating our new strategic plan, which we will be unveiling very soon. I can give just a few high-level goals that we plan to move forward. So the first one is advancing models of care to be more patient-centered, integrated, effective, and we want to make sure that we create more joy in practice for our care teams. We plan on investing in our staff and our board experience to improve recruitment and retention of quality staff and our board members, and investing in our infrastructure and technology to improve environment and our processes. So taking a look at all of our spaces, making sure that they're welcoming. We also, with our new name, will be building our brand reputation to sustain growth, new patients, donors, and partners. And then obviously we're looking forward to strengthen our long-term strength or long-term financial sustainability. So those are some of the things that we'll be looking forward to in the next 3 years.
Just a couple, 2 or 3 small things, right?
Just a few. Yep.
So that leads me into my next question, because of all the things that you just talked about requires a really intentional level of leadership. And that's what we're here to talk about as well. So when you began your career, did you ever imagine that you would have a leadership role like this in a professional organization like Heartland Health Centers?
Absolutely. It's always been in my life's plan to have a leadership role. However, when I joined Heartland Health Centers in 2018, I never imagined that I would be the CEO. It really was an honor when our previous CEO, named me as the interim CEO upon her retirement. And it really was the cherry on top that the board selected me as a permanent CEO. So absolutely knew that I would be in a leadership role, just not this soon.
Yeah, that's great. It's kind of neat to hear that your own personal vision and your own personal path led you to where you are today. That's pretty neat. So a little bit more on leadership. Describe how your leadership style works, how you lead others. You mentioned teams earlier and the strength of the Heartland team. Can you talk about your leadership style with that group?
Absolutely. So I think, as a leader, your style has got to flex based on the situation at hand. But my natural style is a servant leader. I empower the team and I aim for diversity in thought and voice. I think that style as a servant leader, it does increase collaboration and engagement, and it also fosters mutual trust. I think people would say that I'm supportive, and I know when it's important for me to get involved, but I also know when to let the team do what they do best.
Yeah, that's really great. So more on the same topic. Do you believe there are benefits to having women in leadership, and why? I think I know the answer, but I really want to hear your perspective on it.
So Matt, you know that there are studies and data out there that suggest that women are just better leaders. There's evidence that women in leadership roles, they improve the quality of the life of their employees due to their compassion. I think women just bring a different set of skills and perspectives to the workplace. And they often have a higher emotional IQ and soft skills that I think are helpful when leading teams and shaping a positive culture. So definitely benefits to having women in leadership.
That's kind of where I was going with that. So let's talk about power structures a little bit, right? How do you and how can women navigate power structures that traditionally have been held by men?
So I think it's important for women to navigate power structures by making sure that they have a seat at the table. Our male counterparts, they often are not used to women making hard decisions or taking risks. So women, we've got to be strategic in getting along with others to ensure positive outcomes for the greater good of the organization. So really just, making sure that you have a seat at the table.
Have you ever been in a leadership position where you were treated differently than your colleagues? Better, worse, anything like that?
I've definitely been in leadership roles where there were pay inequities,
Sure.
making less money than my either white or male counterparts. I think that that's just something that many of us have had to deal with over the course of our careers. So I'm no different in that aspect.
Yeah, for sure. And I know that's a constant work in progress. We're not there yet, but I think part of this conversation is working on dismantling that and making equity a little bit more forefront, right?
Absolutely. And that really is something that I made a priority when I stepped into the CEO role, is just looking at pay and, how long people have been with the organizations, what their scope of responsibilities were, and try to level set that. So I think that we've tried to knock those barriers down in terms of pay equity at the organization.
Yeah, which leads me to my next question as we get into this subject, which is diversity, equity, inclusion a core value at Heartland Health Centers? And what does that look like today? And what might it look like 3 years down the road?
Absolutely. It is definitely a core value for Heartland. It is central to our vision, our mission. I think, we can say as a leadership team that we celebrate our differences. We promote mutual respect for our multicultural staff, as well as the patients that we serve. So it's absolutely top of mind for everything that we do in the organization.
Sure. What do you think, in your professional opinion or personal opinion, is the most challenging aspect of diversity in healthcare? And that could be with the patients we serve, it could be with the community, it could be with staff or other leaders that you see as colleagues in the healthcare industry.
So thinking about this question, it brought up two issues for me. They both have significant challenges or barriers. So the first issue is around equity in the delivery of healthcare and the chance for everyone to lead healthy lives. The barriers there might be access to transportation, lack of insurance, or having to decide between putting food on the table or paying a costly medical bill. And I think it's our role as healthcare providers to try to reduce as many of those barriers as possible. And then the second issue that it raised for me is the diversity in the healthcare industry as a whole, and ensuring that the providers and the staff mirror the diversity of the patients that we serve. And so I think some of the barriers there are lack of exposure of our Black and brown children early to medical professions. And sometimes it could be, the rising cost of education. So those are just a few barriers there.
Yeah, and we need to identify them in order to work on them, right? And then we can get to work. So what are some of those concrete actions? We like to talk about things like strategic planning and vision and stuff like that, but what are those commitments that will improve DEI and timelines? Anything that you want to share with this group that we might be able to look forward to over the next coming months, years?
So this year, we definitely made DEI a focus at HHC. We've committed to fostering a more diverse, equitable, and inclusive culture here at the organization. In doing so, we started out slow. We established a DEI committee that was made up of staff and providers. That committee, they hosted classes for our staff with topics ranging from microaggressions. We had an LGBTQIA 101, and then we also offered cultural humility. So we knew that committee alone was not enough, so we engaged the Morton Group. Those are experts in DEI in the FQHC space in Chicago. And what they did for us is they completed a formal assessment of our culture. They are working on providing trainings for our staff and our board. And then the long-term plan is for them to assist with the development of a sustainable DEI action plan. And that action plan will have very specific goals, objectives, and metrics for success. They will be looking at our policies and procedures. They'll be looking at our hiring practices. So really looking forward to working with them in that process. So we've completed the formal assessment already. Our DEI trainings, they're going to actually be starting next week. So there are two-hour sessions for every staff person in the organization that are mandatory. And then after those trainings are completed, we will create the plan, and then we'll be moving into that sustainability phase, probably in the summertime.
Yeah. You know, coming up on the 2-year anniversary of Mr. Floyd's murder, I think it's a timely topic to speak about, because if you remember 2 years ago, there was a lot of uproar, or corporations, nonprofits that were writing white pages and letters from the CEO, gnashing their teeth and wringing their hands for good reason. And then a lot of action happened in those next few months, which then from time to time dies away. It doesn't become as urgent. It doesn't become as much in the forefront, not because of anyone specifically not doing it, but because other priorities become up ahead of that, right? So I think it's really, really admirable to you and to the organization that these things that you just talked about with a sustainable action plan become a part of the DNA of the organization. In my opinion, anyway, that's how change happens. And that's how we change the culture of not only Heartland Health Centers, but perhaps others in the community and in our city.
Absolutely.
All right, let's talk about you a little bit more. So we've talked a lot about strategy. We've talked a little bit about Heartland Health Center itself. As we get to know you, Nicole Willis, take off your CEO hat for just a second. How do we, what one word describes you best and why?
I would say the one word that I think accurately describes me is resilient. And I say that because I'm able to meet adversity and setbacks head on. I think I'm able to learn from them and bounce back and then be ready for the next challenge. And I think leading the organization through a pandemic was really a true testament to that.
Yeah, that's great. I love the word resilient. Somebody in my house just mentioned that to me like yesterday. That's what we are, is trying to be resilient. So that's color me inspired. So speaking of inspiration, who really was your inspiration to become a leader and why? And you could talk about mentors or teachers, parents, however that looks like to you. I think that this group would love to hear about that.
Absolutely. My most inspirational role model, hands down, has been my mother, Bernadette Freeman. She's probably somewhere on the call rooting for me, as she's done for the last 50 years. She was a teenage single Black mother, raising 2 kids on the south side of Chicago. She worked her way up the ranks of Illinois Bell while going to college full time. And then she was, she was going to college full time at night to earn her bachelor's degree. So getting her degree allowed her to excel in many executive level positions, not only at Illinois Bell, but at AT&T. And that was over the span of her 30-year career until she retired. And if that wasn't enough, at the age of 50, she decided to go to law school. Wow. So that she could realize her lifelong dream of becoming an attorney. She still is a practicing administrative law judge at the age of 75, and she just wrote her first book. So I think lots to live up to. Growing up, she'd take me to many of her corporate functions where I had the pleasure to meet many people that were movers and shakers in their careers. And, you know, that was just very, very inspirational for me. So leadership is something that I saw from a very early age, quite frankly, from both my mother and father. My father was also an entrepreneur. So it just came natural to me.
So maybe this comes from that same thing, but if you could go back in time in a time machine to your 25-year-old self, you know, what are some advice would you give yourself? Maybe that comes from your mom, maybe it comes from someplace else, but what would you say to yourself if we can go back to 25-year-old?
So my 25-year-old self was married with 2 children. So what I would go back and say to her is what I tell my 22-year-old daughter who's finishing her degree in nursing. I tell her, travel the world and learn who you are and become who you want to be. And, you know, everything else is golden from there. And I think that comes from my love for travel, and that I didn't get a chance to do that when I was 25 years old.
That's really good advice. I'm probably going to take that and write that down. What are some of the ways, with all the stuff going on, from Heartland to family to travel to all of this, how do you stay grounded and sort of take care of yourself? Because, I mean, ultimately, we need you to be healthy, right? So how do you do that?
So what I try to do is I try to start my day with some prayer, meditation, and definitely a good workout. I can't really get started without a workout. Other than that, I like to read. You know that I like to play golf. We've had an opportunity to do that together. I play golf in a women's league at Harborside. And as I just mentioned, I love to travel, and I do that with both my family and friends. So that really is how I try to stay grounded.
That's great. Yeah, golf. It sounds good, doesn't it? Yeah, I'm looking
Sure
forward to
does.
the warmer
Can't
days.
do it today, unfortunately.
Yeah, we'll get there. All right, a question came through in the chat. As a federally qualified health center, Heartland relies on continuing contracting of federal funds, right? Nicole, what do you think the prospects are for continuing governmental support of FQHCs?
I think the prospects are very good for us receiving continued support. I think FQHCs are vital to providing care to patients who otherwise would not be able to receive care. And so I think it is definitely something that we can continue to see coming through. It probably won't be as substantial as it has been over the last, 2 years with COVID, because we really got a lot of funding from the government in that respect. But I think it definitely will be around. It's vital to providing care again to people who otherwise would not be able to receive care.
Yeah, that's great. Well, I think this is a good time to pause and ask if anybody else has any questions from the room. You can either pop them into the chat or even unmute yourself in a minute, and we'll give everybody time to do that. The first one that came through is branding questions. As our branding changes, do you see a change in messaging on populations that we focus on? It's a great question.
I don't see changes. There might be some additions to the populations that we focus on. Kathy, you might know that we are expanding our services to like refugee and immigrant populations. So we would probably focus a little bit more on that. But I don't see any major changes with our branding as we move forward, probably expanding into some different populations.
Great. Other opportunities for questions. If anyone has any, you can just unmute yourself or raise your hand or pop it into the chat. We're happy to field some of them as we go along. Otherwise, we definitely have other ones we can talk about.
Thank you, Emily. I'm glad you were able to be here.
Nicole, given the difficulty that many industries are having hiring staff right now, what are the challenges for Heartland along those lines?
Very similar to what we're seeing in other industries. I talked to some of my colleagues at other FQHCs, and we're all in the same boat. It's a struggle to hire medical assistants. We're very short staffed with our front desk. And so we've had to resort to temporary services. We've offered referral bonuses, sign-on bonuses to, get people through the door. I think it's a challenge when you've got to compete with big box stores who are paying people, very high salaries. And so we just had to be creative with our hiring strategies, quite frankly. You're on mute, Matt.
I was just going to say it's a good question because we certainly aren't exempt from the job shortage in the rest of the world, and how we react to that and try to plan for it is really, really important, no doubt.
Absolutely.
Just checking the chat to see if any other questions have come through. It's sort of a quiet crowd this morning, Nicole.
Hey, this is Gordon, Mayor, and I know that there's lots of different folks on the call, but some of the folks who are joined us this morning come from like a donor and a supporter perspective, and I know that's a key group. Do you want to talk a little bit about how the private funding fits in with the government funding piece that was asked about earlier?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we've been very fortunate to have our private donors support us over the last couple of years. They've changed the way that they have allowed us to use some of the funding. Many of them previously were focused on a specific program. And over the course of the last 2 years, we've been able to use a lot of that funding for general operating purposes. And so that's been very helpful. I know that our funders are definitely looking at, the diversity within the organization. So that's something that we're obviously focused on, as I mentioned previously. So I think that there are definitely going to be continued opportunities, but we've got to be strategic about how we proceed so that we can make sure that we're continuing to have those funding opportunities. There are
Janet, are you looking for a gig, Janet? Is that what's up? Okay.
We actually have a COO position open. I don't know, I'm sure you know Janet, our previous COO, Megan Erskine. She took a CEO position in Michigan, so very happy for her, but that left an open position. We're actively recruiting for that at this point. But yeah, hit me up offline, Janet, and we can talk.
There you go. Coming out of retirement, Janet. I love it.
Janet and I used to work at Northwestern together, so
Yeah,
that'd
that's
be an easy fit.
Yeah. Any other questions or thoughts?
So Nicole, I'll ask this one in person. So are we looking at an in-person event this year, or are we waiting on it, or how are we moving towards that?
Yes, good question. We've got our development team on the line too, but they are actively working to put together an in-person gala. It's October. I don't know the date because I haven't put it in my head just yet, but we are actively working on that. So our hope is to have in-person with some virtual component to it. We're still trying to figure that out, but you can expect that there will be some in-person events. We're actually having our first in-person board meeting after the last 2 years in May. So we are definitely making our strides to October 7th. Thank you, Nicole. So we're definitely trying to move back to in-person opportunities.
Good question. Yeah, and we're excited about it too. Always keeping an eye on things and seeing where safety first, of course, which is a challenging thing right now, but we're confident that we'll get there and raise some money and have some fun at the same time. Good questions.
Yep.
Nicole, could you explain what joy in care is?
Yes, reducing burnout for our providers and staff, taking away a lot of the burdensome charting and unnecessary work, just to make their lives a little easier. I think that there's an abundance of unnecessary check boxes and things that they have to do. So we're looking at making changes to our EMRs so that their work is a little bit easier. So again, reducing burnout is really a short answer to that.
I do like the term joy and care though. I don't know, something about that feels good about Heartland's mission. Question came through in the chat. Nicole, talk a little bit more about Heartland's DEI efforts from the patient's perspective, which is an excellent question, given that the populations we serve, from immigrants to refugees, the north side from Albany Park and Uptown. I think that's a really good thing to maybe unpack the DEI efforts in that area a little bit.
So providing training for our staff to understand the different cultures that we are serving. Again, making sure that our staff and our providers really mirror the populations that we serve. I think we all feel a little bit better when we know, the people that are caring for us look like us, they understand our cultures. So those are some of the things that we are doing from a patient perspective. Really, again, providing much needed trainings for our staff so that they understand how to care for the patients. One of them that I mentioned earlier was LGBTQIA. So, understanding what the different pronouns mean, how to interact with patients who might fall in that category. So those are some of the initiatives from a patient perspective.
That's great. I have a question about, we haven't really touched too much on relationships, but I'm curious to hear your position and your perspective and your approach to building, maintaining, leveraging, and growing relationships in your professional life that have brought you to where you are today, and then how you're doing that and curating that to propel you personally and the organization forward the next 4 years.
I would say that that's something that I need to work a little bit more on. It's been a little bit of a challenge taking over in the interim CEO role in the pandemic. During the pandemic, everything in person was shut down.
Mm-hmm.
So that is an area of focus for me over the next year or so, is cultivating relationships. I'm a part of a couple of collaboratives through FQHC. So I've had an opportunity to meet and talk to a number of the other CEOs at different FQHCs across the city. We meet monthly, also have a relationship with Medical Home Network. I see a couple of people from there on, and so that provides a networking opportunity. I've joined the finance committee for Medical Home Network. So I've got a number of different opportunities, but I think, as I've mentioned, just over the course of the next year, that is an opportunity that I need to really focus on, is establishing relationships. And hopefully, the reduction in COVID cases will allow for more in-person establishing relationships with our partners, like our hospital partners, whether it's Swedish or North Shore. Those are definitely opportunities that I would love to build upon.
Yeah, and I appreciate your honesty with that, and just sort of coming to this conversation. And I think that, just to zoom out for a quick second, that's your approach to many things in your leadership role, is a growth mindset and finding those areas of opportunity to work on, and then doing so. So talk about growth mindset. Growth mindset obviously is a book that many of us have read, and we kind of get it. Okay, have an open mind and approach it. But
yeah,
what do you think about let me rephrase that. How do you wake up in the morning, do your workout, do your meditation and prayer, and then open it up for a growth mindset?
Taking every opportunity by the horns, and trying to learn from every opportunity, seeing the silver linings in everything, whether it is a challenge, whether it is a setback. There's always room to grow. And I'm always open to growth and learning. I am a lifelong learner, and understand that I'm never perfect. And I also want to be honest about that. You asked the question about relationships. I know that's an area that I need to focus on. And it's just really about putting in the work to do that.
That's great, because it's a really hard thing to do sometimes, right? For me anyway, right? To have that growth mindset in all that I'm doing. Sometimes it's a little exhausting, sometimes it's a little tiring, but ultimately it really is a payoff. How do you approach, let's call them courageous conversations, when you have a strategy or something that is the right way to do it, but boy, we've got another competing sort of two people sitting in front of you, in front of your desk, how do you come across or look forward to or lean into those courageous conversations?
I think it's really about having the facts, you know, and data to support your position. I think, you know, as long as you've got those things, the conversation should be pretty easy.
Yeah, yeah, right. Going back to the facts. I mean, that's sounds sort of simple, but if you sort of look at it like that, this is it, then you can take my opinion out of it, take my bias out of it. And this is the direction that we think we should go.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's great. Any other questions from the group, either in the chat or feel free to unmute and just go ahead and shout them out.
So Nicole G is asking, what expansion projects does HHC have?
Okay.
She probably knows this a lot more than I do, but I will go ahead and answer. So we've got a number of projects that we're working on right now. Our first one is at Albany Park at our 3737 West Lawrence location. We are expanding that health center to include 2 new exam rooms to support specialty providers who'll be rotating from Swedish into our health center. So we'll have 5 specialists that will come in on a regular basis, and our providers can basically do warm handoffs, whether it is to a cardiologist, dermatologist, or orthopedic surgeon. I'm probably forgetting 2 of them, but that space will allow for the specialists to work out of. And then our next expansion project is at our Devon location. And so we're going to be expanding our women's health. Our previous call center was in that space, and we'll expand it for women's health. And then finally, our Trilogy location, where we have a partnership, we provide primary care services at Trilogy. We will be expanding that space as well. So lots going on. We've obviously applied for a number of grants where we're looking for an opportunity to move our Wilson location. That is a health center that we've had for many years. It's located in a City of Chicago building, and it is a little old and time for a refresh. We've done a lot of renovations there, but it's old, and our staff really would love a more welcoming space. So we're looking for an opportunity to move and maybe expand in that uptown neighborhood. So those are a couple of the projects that we have going on.
Just a few small things, right? It seems like Heartland doesn't do anything small. It's always these big things. I love it. All right, how about the last question, and then we'll go ahead and wrap things up. It's about patient portals, which are a great tool. I agree. Challenge to navigate sometimes, no doubt about it. I have trouble with the one that I use right now with a different provider. So how are we going to introduce it to the patient population? Because ultimately that's where it's most important, so patients understand and utilize it.
So this one is definitely something that's unfolding. We just hired or promoted a director of data and digital infrastructure. I'm probably butchering his title, but that will be his whole focus, is implementing our new EHR and you know, rolling all of those things out for our patients. And I know it won't be an easy task. But I think it'll be a lot of educational opportunities. We'll probably have something on our website, you know, some sort of like tutorials for patients to be able to follow along. And then I would say, you know, we do have a number of patients that are of low literacy. And so our goal would be to walk them through it when they're in person, so that they're able to understand how they would interact with the portal on an ongoing basis.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to end, just because what I'm hearing from you, Nicole, throughout this conversation and through my experience with Heartland is that patient-first approach. We are not going to implement, we're not going to change Wilson, we're not going to expand unless it's really in the best interest of those that we serve. And that comes to the patient portal, it comes to providers, it comes to strategy, and all the stuff that we talked about today. And to me, at the end of it all, that's really what it's all about, and why I personally am inspired to continue to do this work. And I hope that kind of came through in this coffee talk.
Absolutely.
All right, this has been wonderful. We thank you all for joining us. Like I said earlier, you could be anywhere else today, maybe doing work, maybe doing something else, but spending 45 minutes to understand our leader, Nicole, and some of the things that are happening at Heartland is really an honor for us. So thank you for spending some time. Nicole, do you feel like saying anything else before we close?
Sure. I just want to thank you, Matt. This was great to talk to you. And I appreciate, as you said, everyone providing the time to spend with me today. And I look forward to seeing you all in person and working with you on some level. Have a
Indeed.
great day, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Take good care. We'll see you all soon. Bye-bye.
Bye.